Tonight, we begin a gentle journey into one of the most liberating truths the Buddha ever taught. Through ancient wisdom and timeless stories, we will explore what it means to embrace our imperfections rather than fight against them. These are not lessons demanding perfection or techniques requiring mastery. They are teachings that will naturally settle into your awareness, guiding you toward the peace that comes from accepting yourself exactly as you are. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. If you have been struggling to measure up, know that you are not alone. If you have been exhausted by the constant effort to fix yourself, that too is deeply human. The Buddha understood that we all carry this burden of trying to be perfect, trying to be enough, trying to be something other than what we naturally are. Tonight, we will explore a profound shift in perspective, moving from the exhausting pursuit of perfection to the peaceful practice of embracing what is. Not because we are giving up or settling for less, but because we are finally seeing clearly. We are recognizing that our imperfections are not obstacles to overcome, but doorways to wisdom, compassion, and genuine freedom. As we move through these teachings and stories, you may notice your breathing naturally deepening, your body naturally softening. Understanding brings its own relief. There is nowhere else you need to be right now. Nothing about yourself you need to fix tonight. Just rest here as we explore the Buddha's teachings together. The Buddha once observed something that most people overlook. He noticed that suffering does not come primarily from our imperfections themselves, but from our resistance to those imperfections, from our belief that we should be different than we are, from the constant inner war we wage against our own nature. He saw people exhausting themselves trying to become perfect, trying to eliminate every flaw, control every emotion, master every situation. He watched as this pursuit of perfection created more suffering than the original imperfections ever could. And he offered a radically different path. What if, the Buddha suggested, we stopped fighting what we are and instead began to understand it? What if we approached our flaws with curiosity rather than criticism? What if we saw our mistakes as teachers rather than as evidence of our inadequacy? This is not about lowering standards or abandoning growth. The Buddha was not teaching complacency or carelessness. He was teaching something far more subtle and powerful. He was showing us that real transformation happens not through harsh self-rejection, but through gentle self-acceptance. That we change most profoundly when we stop demanding that we be different. There is a teaching in Buddhism about the lotus flower. The lotus grows in muddy water, yet it produces one of the most beautiful flowers in nature. The mud is not an obstacle to the lotus. The mud is essential. Without the mud, there would be no lotus. The flower does not bloom in spite of the mud, but because of it. Our imperfections are like this mud. We have been taught to see them as obstacles, as problems to eliminate, as shameful aspects of ourselves that we must hide or fix. But what if they are actually the fertile ground from which our wisdom and compassion grow? What if the very things we have been rejecting about ourselves contain the nutrients for our awakening? Tonight we explore this possibility together, that we are not broken and in need of fixing, that we are not failures for having flaws, that we are simply human, beautifully and perfectly imperfect, exactly as we need to be for our own unique journey of growth and understanding. Let us begin with a story that shows this teaching in a way that might settle into your bones more deeply than words alone can reach. In a village known throughout the region for its pottery, there lived a young woman named Yuki who had apprenticed with the master potter since childhood. She had learned the ancient techniques, studied the traditional forms, and practiced endlessly to perfect her craft. By the time she reached her 20th year, she was already recognized as highly skilled. But Yuki carried a heavy burden. She was obsessed with perfection. Every piece she created had to meet impossible standards. The walls had to be exactly uniform in thickness. The glaze had to be flawlessly smooth. The form had to match the classical proportions precisely. When a piece fell even slightly short of these standards, she would smash it rather than allow it to exist. Her workshop floor was constantly littered with shards of broken pottery. Beautiful bowls destroyed because of a tiny irregularity in the rim. Elegant vases shattered because the glaze pooled slightly in one spot. Functional teapots smashed because the spout curved a fraction differently than she had envisioned. Her teacher, an elderly potter named Master Hideo, would watch this destruction with quiet concern. He had been making pottery for 60 years, and he understood something that Yuki had not yet learned, but he knew she would need to discover it herself. Teaching could only point the way. Understanding had to emerge from experience. One spring, a wealthy patron commissioned Yuki to create a tea set for an important ceremony. It was a prestigious opportunity, the kind that could establish her reputation beyond the village. She threw herself into the work with intense focus and anxiety. Everything had to be absolutely perfect. For weeks, Yuki worked on the tea set. She would create a cup, examine it with ruthless scrutiny, find some minuscule flaw, and destroy it. She went through dozens of attempts. Her anxiety grew with each failure. The deadline approached, and she still had not created a single piece that met her standards. The night before the tea set was due, Yuki was working late in her workshop, exhausted and desperate. She had one more chance to create the teapot. Her hands were shaking from fatigue and stress as she shaped the clay on the wheel. As she formed the spout, her exhausted hand trembled. The spout came out slightly crooked, curving to the left in a way that was clearly imperfect. Yuki's heart sank. She had failed again. There was no time to make another. She lifted the teapot off the wheel, intending to smash it as she had smashed so many others. But something stopped her. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the lateness of the hour. Maybe it was simply that she had finally reached her limit. Instead of destroying it, she set it aside and stared at it. The crooked spout bothered her deeply. It was wrong. It was imperfect. It was not what she had intended. But as she sat there in the quiet workshop, looking at this flawed teapot, something began to shift in her vision. The crooked spout gave the teapot a quality she had not expected. It looked less formal, more intimate. It had character and personality. It looked like something that had been made by human hands, not by a machine. The imperfection made it feel alive in a way that her perfectly symmetrical pieces somehow did not. Yuki sat with this realization for a long time. She thought about all the pieces she had destroyed in pursuit of perfection. How many beautiful objects had she smashed because they did not match her rigid vision? How much life and character had she eliminated in her quest for flawless uniformity? As dawn approached, Yuki made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. She would finish the tea set and include the teapot with the crooked spout. She would allow this imperfection to exist. She would see what happened when she stopped destroying everything that fell short of her impossible standards. She completed the rest of the tea set that morning, working quickly before she could change her mind. When the patron came to collect the pieces, Yuki's hands trembled as she presented them. She pointed out the crooked spout, apologizing, offering to make a replacement if needed. The patron picked up the teapot and examined it carefully. Yuki held her breath, waiting for the criticism, the disappointment, the rejection she was certain would come. But the patron smiled. "This is wonderful," he said. "Do you see how the spout curves? It feels like the teapot is leaning in, offering itself. There is a warmth to this piece. It does not hold itself apart in rigid perfection. It comes toward you with generous imperfection." He set down the teapot and looked at Yuki. "You have created something special here. Your other pieces are technically excellent, but they feel cold somehow. This one feels alive. Please do not change it." After the patron left, Yuki sat alone in her workshop for a long time. Her teacher, Master Hideo, came in and found her there, sitting quietly among the shards of all her destroyed attempts at perfection. "What are you thinking?" he asked gently. "I have been so foolish," Yuki said. "I have been destroying beauty in the name of perfection. I thought my flaws were the enemy, but maybe they are what makes my work human. What makes it real?" Master Hideo nodded slowly. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." He led her to a storage room she had never entered before. Inside were shelves filled with pottery. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, Yuki realized these were not ordinary pieces. Each one had some obvious imperfection. A crack running through a bowl, a glaze that had run and pooled unevenly, a cup with one side slightly higher than the other. But they were also extraordinarily beautiful. The imperfections gave each piece a unique character. The crack in the bowl created a pattern like lightning. The running glaze looked like a waterfall frozen in ceramic. The uneven cup felt perfect for cradling in your hands. "These are the pieces I have made over 60 years that taught me the most," Master Hideo said. "Each one began as what I thought was a failure, a mistake, an imperfection I had not intended. But instead of destroying them, I kept them. I lived with them. I learned from them." He picked up a teacup with an irregular rim. "This cup happened when I was interrupted while working, and the clay dried unevenly. I was angry at myself for the mistake, but then I noticed how comfortable this irregular rim felt against the lips, how it fit the mouth more naturally than a perfectly circular rim. The mistake taught me something about the relationship between form and function that years of perfect technique had not revealed." He set it down and gestured to the whole collection. "Every master potter has pieces like these hidden away. Pieces we keep secret because they reveal the truth we are not supposed to admit. That some of our most profound learning comes from what we did wrong. That our imperfections often create something more interesting than our perfectionism ever could." He turned to Yuki with kind eyes. "You have extraordinary skill. Your technique is already excellent. But technique without the willingness to embrace imperfection creates objects that are correct, but lifeless. The truly great potters are not those who make no mistakes. They are those who know how to dance with the mistakes, how to let imperfection guide them toward discoveries they could never plan." From that day forward, Yuki's approach to pottery transformed. She still practiced technique and worked to improve her skills, but she stopped destroying every piece that fell short of perfect. She began to work with the clay rather than trying to dominate it. She allowed accidents to inform her process rather than treating them as failures. She discovered that when she stopped fighting imperfection, her work became freer, more expressive, more alive. The pieces she created were not technically perfect according to classical standards, but they had a warmth and humanity that her earlier perfect pieces had lacked. Years later, when students would come to Yuki seeking to learn pottery, she would take them first to her own version of that storage room, a collection of pieces that began as mistakes, but became teachers, and she would tell them what Master Hideo had taught her. Perfection is not the goal, she would say. Life is the goal. Growth is the goal. Discovery is the goal. And all of these emerge more readily from our willingness to embrace imperfection than from our desperate attempts to eliminate it. Take a breath here. Feel how Yuki's story might reflect something in your own experience. We all know what it feels like to wage war against our own imperfections, to destroy or hide the parts of ourselves that do not measure up to some ideal, to exhaust ourselves pursuing standards that may be impossible or even undesirable. The Buddha's teaching on imperfection helps us see this pattern clearly. We have been taught that our flaws are problems to fix, obstacles to overcome, shameful aspects to hide. But what if they are actually opportunities? What if the very things we judge as wrong about ourselves are gateways to deeper understanding, greater compassion, and more authentic living? This is not about celebrating carelessness or refusing to grow. Yuki continued to develop her skills and technique. Master Hideo had practiced for 60 years to deepen his mastery. But they both understood that real excellence emerges not from the elimination of all imperfection, but from the wisdom to work with imperfection skillfully. The wisdom here is subtle but profound. When we stop fighting what is, and instead begin to understand it, we discover resources and possibilities we never knew existed. The crooked spout that Yuki almost destroyed became the very thing that gave her teapot its life and warmth. The irregular rim that Master Hideo initially saw as a failure taught him something that decades of correct technique could not. What in your life have you been seeing as a failure or flaw that might actually be a teacher? What imperfection have you been trying to eliminate that might be trying to show you something important? What aspect of yourself have you been rejecting that might actually be part of your unique gift to offer the world? You do not need to answer these questions tonight. Just let them rest gently in your awareness as we continue exploring these teachings. The Buddha understood something essential about the human condition. He saw that we create much of our suffering through what he called the three poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion. But underneath all three is a more fundamental problem: the belief that things should be different than they are. The resistance to reality as it actually presents itself. When we believe we should be different than we are, we create the poison of self-hatred. When we believe others should be different than they are, we create the poison of judgment and resentment. When we believe reality itself should conform to our preferences, we create the poison of delusion and frustration. All of this stems from an inability to embrace what is, from the deep-seated conviction that imperfection is wrong and must be corrected. But what if imperfection is not wrong? What if it is simply the nature of existence itself? Let us explore another story that shows this teaching from a different angle. In a monastery high in the mountains, there lived a young monk named Kenji who had come to practice meditation with great earnestness. He had read about enlightened beings who could sit perfectly still for hours, their minds like clear mountain lakes, undisturbed by a single ripple of thought. This was what he wanted for himself. But when Kenji actually sat down to meditate, his experience was nothing like this ideal. His back would ache within minutes. His legs would fall asleep. His nose would itch at the most inconvenient moments. And his mind, rather than being a clear lake, was more like a rushing river, thoughts cascading over each other in an endless, chaotic flow. At first, Kenji tried to force his way to perfection. He would sit rigidly, ignoring the pain in his back, fighting against the urge to scratch his nose, trying desperately to stop the thoughts through sheer willpower. Each meditation session became a battle, his body versus his will, his actual experience versus his ideal of what meditation should be. After several months of this struggle, Kenji was more tense and frustrated than when he had arrived at the monastery. He felt like a failure. Everyone else seemed to be making progress while he remained hopelessly imperfect at even the most basic practice. One evening, after a particularly difficult meditation session, Kenji approached his teacher, a monk named Sozin, who had been practicing for 40 years. Kenji's frustration poured out. He described his aching back, his restless legs, his mind that refused to be still. He confessed that he must not be cut out for meditation, that something fundamental was wrong with him. Sozin listened with patient attention. When Kenji finished, the teacher asked a simple question. "Tell me, when you sit down to meditate, what are you expecting to happen?" Kenji answered immediately, "I expect my mind to become still. I expect to stop having thoughts. I expect to experience the peace and clarity that the teachings describe." Sozin nodded. "And when these expectations are not met, what happens?" "I feel like I am failing," Kenji said, like I am doing something wrong, like I am not good enough at this practice. The teacher was quiet for a moment, looking out at the mountains visible through the window. "Those mountains," he said. "Do you think they ever wish they were different? Do you think they struggle against their own nature?" Kenji looked at the mountains, uncertain how to respond. "The mountains have sharp peaks and gentle slopes," Sozin continued. "They have smooth faces and rough faces. They have trees in some places and bare rock in others. They do not judge these variations as good or bad, perfect or imperfect. They simply are what they are, shaped by countless conditions over countless years." He turned back to Kenji. "Your meditation practice is like this. Some days your back aches, some days it does not. Some days your mind is busy, some days it is quieter. Some days you feel peaceful, some days you feel frustrated. All of this is simply what is arising based on countless conditions. Sleep, health, stress, weather, what you ate, what you are worried about, infinite causes and conditions creating this moment's experience." "But you are adding something extra to all of this," Sozin said gently. "You are adding the judgment that what is arising is wrong, that it should be different, that you are failing because your experience does not match your expectations. This judgment is what creates your suffering, not the aching back or the busy mind." Kenji felt something shift slightly in his understanding. "Are you saying I should not try to improve? That I should just accept whatever happens and not practice properly?" "No," Sozin said. "I am saying something different. Practice with full effort, but without the violence of self-rejection. Work with your posture, but do not hate your body when it aches. Train your attention, but do not despise your mind when it wanders. Notice what is actually happening without the extra layer of judgment about how it should be different." He stood and walked to where Kenji was sitting. "Let me show you something. Close your eyes and pay attention to your breathing." Kenji closed his eyes and brought his attention to his breath. After a moment, Sozin asked, "Is your breathing perfect? Is it exactly the rhythm and depth it should be?" Kenji noticed that his breath was somewhat shallow and irregular. "No," he said, "it is not perfect. And yet you are breathing," Sozin said. "You are alive. Your imperfect breath is sustaining you moment by moment. It does not need to be perfect to fulfill its function. It simply needs to be what it is." He let this land before continuing. "Your meditation practice is the same. It does not need to be perfect. It simply needs to be authentic, present, engaged with what actually is rather than what you wish it were." Over the following weeks, Kenji began to practice differently. When his back ached, instead of judging it as a failure, he would notice, "Ah, there is aching in the back." When his mind wandered, instead of criticizing himself, he would simply observe, "The mind is thinking about dinner now." And then, gently, without violence, he would return his attention to his breath. What Kenji discovered was remarkable. When he stopped fighting his imperfections, they stopped dominating his experience. The aching back was still there sometimes, but it was just sensation, not evidence of his inadequacy. The wandering mind still produced thoughts, but they were just mental events, not proof of his failure. And paradoxically, as he stopped demanding perfection, his practice actually deepened. Not because his mind became perfectly still or his posture became perfectly comfortable, but because he was finally working with reality as it was rather than reality as he thought it should be. Months later, Kenji was sitting in meditation when Sozin happened to walk past. The teacher paused, observing his student. Kenji's posture was not perfectly straight. His face showed some discomfort, but there was also a quality of ease and acceptance that had not been there before. After the meditation session, Sozin approached Kenji. "Your practice has changed," he observed. "Tell me what you have discovered." Kenji thought for a moment. I have discovered that perfection was never the point. Presence is the point. Acceptance is the point. Working with what is rather than fighting for what should be. I still have an aching back sometimes. My mind still wanders constantly, but I am no longer at war with myself about it. Susan smiled. This is the beginning of real practice, not when we eliminate all imperfections, but when we stop being at war with them. Not when we achieve some perfect state, but when we meet each imperfect moment with wisdom and compassion. He placed a hand on Kenji's shoulder. The Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree and achieved enlightenment in a human body. A body that got hungry and tired. A body that aged and eventually died. Enlightenment did not mean transcending the body's imperfections. It meant fully understanding and accepting them. This is what you are learning. Years later, when Kenji became a teacher himself, students would come to him with the same frustrations he had once felt. They would describe their imperfect practices, their wandering minds, their aching bodies, and Kenji would smile with understanding and tell them about the mountains that do not judge their own variations, about the breath that sustains us despite its imperfections, about the practice that deepens not through the elimination of flaws, but through the acceptance of what is. Take another slow breath and notice what arises. Can you feel the difference between working with yourself and working against yourself? Between accepting what is present and demanding that it be different? Both Yuki and Kenji learned the same essential teaching from different angles. Yuki discovered that her imperfect pottery held more life than her perfect pieces. Kenji discovered that his imperfect practice held more wisdom than his perfectionist struggle. Both found freedom not through eliminating their flaws, but through changing their relationship to those flaws. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught about embracing imperfection. Not that we should cultivate carelessness or celebrate dysfunction, but that we should meet ourselves and our experiences with acceptance rather than resistance, with curiosity rather than judgment, with compassion rather than criticism. The shift is subtle, but transformative. We can still work to improve our skills like Yuki continued developing her pottery technique. We can still train our minds like Kenji continued practicing meditation. But we do these things from a foundation of acceptance rather than self-rejection. From a recognition that we are already complete, even as we grow and change. From an understanding that our imperfections are not obstacles to our development, but part of the very ground from which development emerges. As you rest here tonight, you might notice areas of your life where you have been at war with your own imperfections, where you have been demanding that you be different, better, more advanced than you actually are. This awareness itself is valuable. You do not need to fix these patterns tonight. Simply noticing them with gentleness is enough. Simply seeing the war is the first step toward peace. The Buddha taught that everything in existence is marked by three characteristics: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. Tonight we focus particularly on the second of these, unsatisfactoriness. This word in the original Pali is dukkha, which is often translated as suffering, but its meaning is more subtle. Dukkha points to the fundamental unreliability and incompleteness of all conditioned things. Nothing in the world of form can ever be perfectly satisfying because everything is changing, everything is dependent on conditions, everything is impermanent. A beautiful flower is already wilting even as it blooms. A moment of happiness already contains the seeds of its ending. Every gain comes with loss, every pleasure with pain, every meeting with parting. This might sound pessimistic, but the Buddha was not a pessimist. He was a realist. He was simply pointing to something obvious that most of us try desperately not to see. That perfection is not a state we can achieve in this conditioned world. That everything, without exception, is marked by incompleteness, change, and vulnerability. Understanding this deeply changes everything. If perfection is not possible, then our suffering does not come from failing to achieve it. Our suffering comes from believing we should achieve it, from treating imperfection as a problem to solve rather than as the fundamental nature of existence. When we truly accept that everything is imperfect, that this is not a bug but a feature of reality itself, we can finally stop fighting. We can finally rest. We can meet each moment as it is, imperfect and incomplete, without the extra layer of resistance that creates so much of our pain. Let us explore a story that shows this understanding emerging in someone's life. In a village surrounded by rice fields, there lived a farmer named Takeshi who had inherited his family's land. For generations, his ancestors had grown rice in these fields, and Takeshi took great pride in continuing this tradition. He wanted each harvest to be perfect, to honor his family's legacy, and provide abundantly for his own wife and children. Takeshi worked tirelessly. He studied every aspect of rice cultivation. He consulted with the oldest farmers about traditional techniques. He experimented with new methods he heard about from traveling merchants. He was obsessed with creating the perfect conditions for his crop. But nature, as Takeshi learned again and again, does not cooperate with our demands for perfection. One year, there was too much rain, and some of his crop was damaged by flooding. Another year, there was not enough rain, and the yield was smaller than expected. Sometimes pests would attack despite his precautions. Sometimes an early frost would come before the harvest was complete. Each of these imperfections devastated Takeshi. He would walk his fields in despair, looking at the damaged plants, the uneven growth, the places where his vision of a perfect harvest had been disrupted by reality. He felt like a failure. He was convinced he was letting down his ancestors, his family, his village. The stress of this perfectionism affected everything. Takeshi could not sleep well during growing season, constantly worried about what might go wrong. He was short-tempered with his wife and children, preoccupied with his fears of failure. He found no joy in the work that had once been a source of satisfaction. The pursuit of perfection had drained all the life from his farming. One autumn, after a harvest that Takeshi judged to be particularly disappointing, he was sitting by his field at dusk, staring out at the stubble left after cutting. An old farmer from a neighboring village happened to be passing by and saw Takeshi's dejected posture. This old farmer, whose name was Hiroshi, had known hardship and success in his own long years of farming. He sat down beside Takeshi without invitation. "You look troubled," Hiroshi said simply. Takeshi poured out his frustration. The harvest had been mediocre. Parts of the crop had been damaged by an unexpected windstorm. The yield was less than he had hoped. He felt he had failed, that all his effort had been for nothing. Hiroshi listened quietly. When Takeshi finished, the old farmer asked, "Do you have enough rice to feed your family through the winter?" Takeshi nodded. "Yes, there is enough for that. And enough to keep for next year's seed." "Yes," Takeshi admitted, "and enough to sell or trade for other necessities." "Yes, but it is not what it should have been. It is not perfect. It is not the harvest I worked so hard to create." Hiroshi was silent for a long moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. Then he spoke quietly. "I have been farming for 60 years. I have seen 60 harvests, and I will tell you something that took me most of those years to understand. There has never been a perfect harvest. Not once. Not ever." Takeshi looked at him in surprise. "Every year something is not quite right," Hiroshi continued. "Too much rain or too little, pests or disease, early frost or late spring, wind or hail or drought. In 60 years, there has not been a single harvest that matched my vision of perfection. And yet 60 times the imperfect harvest was enough. 60 times my family ate. 60 times life continued." He gestured toward Takeshi's field. You are making yourself miserable by comparing reality to some imaginary perfect harvest that exists only in your mind. But that perfect harvest is a ghost. It is not real. What is real is this harvest, imperfect and incomplete, but also sufficient and life-giving. Takeshi wanted to argue, but something in Hiroshi's words resonated with a deep tiredness in him. He was exhausted from fighting reality, from demanding that nature conform to his vision of perfection. "Let me ask you something," Hiroshi said. "When you eat rice, does it matter if it came from a perfect harvest or an imperfect one? Does the rice know? Does your body care?" Takeshi shook his head slowly. "The rice grows. The rice feeds us. This is what matters. Everything else, all your agony about perfection, that is something extra you are adding. Nature is not perfect. Weather is not perfect. Life is not perfect. Only in your mind does this perfect harvest exist, and it torments you precisely because it can never be real." The old farmer stood to leave. "You have good land. You work hard. You care about your crop. These things are valuable. But this demand for perfection, this is what is stealing your peace. This is what is preventing you from seeing the abundance that is actually present in your imperfect harvest." After Hiroshi left, Takeshi sat for a long time in the gathering darkness. He thought about those 60 imperfect harvests, each one enough to sustain life, despite not meeting some ideal standard. He thought about all the years he had wasted in misery, rejecting the good because it was not perfect. That night, something began to shift in Takeshi's mind. It was not a sudden transformation, but the beginning of a different way of seeing. He started to recognize how his demand for perfection was creating suffering beyond anything his actual circumstances warranted. Over the following years, Takeshi learned to work with imperfection rather than against it. When weather did not cooperate, he adjusted rather than despaired. When pests came, he managed what he could and accepted what he could not control. He began to see each harvest not as a success or failure measured against some perfect standard, but as a unique response to that year's particular conditions. What Takeshi discovered was profound. As he released his grip on perfection, he actually became a better farmer, not because his harvests became flawless, they never did, but because he could respond to reality more skillfully when he was not constantly fighting against it. He could see problems more clearly when he was not blinded by disappointment that they existed at all. He could make wise decisions when his mind was not clouded by the stress of perfectionism. More importantly, he rediscovered joy in his work. He could appreciate the beauty of rice plants swaying in the breeze without calculating whether they were meeting his yield projections. He could feel satisfaction in a day's work without needing it to be perfect. He could sit with his family at dinner and taste the rice without the bitter flavor of disappointment that it had not come from a perfect harvest. Years later, Takeshi's own son began working the fields with him. The young man was enthusiastic, but also anxious, wanting everything to be exactly right. Takeshi recognized his former self in his son's tense perfection. One evening, after the son had been frustrated by some irregularity in the crop, Takeshi told him about Hiroshi and the 60 imperfect harvests. He shared what he had learned about the ghost of perfection that haunts us, making us reject the real abundance that is actually present. "The harvest will never be perfect," Takeshi told his son. "The weather will never cooperate exactly as we hope. Nature will always have its own wisdom, which sometimes conflicts with our plans. But if we can work with what is rather than fighting for what we think should be, we will find that the imperfect harvest is enough. It has always been enough. It will always be enough." His son listened, and though Takeshi knew the understanding would have to emerge from the young man's own experience, he hoped he had planted a seed that might grow into the recognition that embracing imperfection is not giving up on excellence. It is actually the foundation of genuine peace and skillful action. Take a breath here and feel what Takeshi's story might be showing you. How many perfect harvests have you been waiting for? How much actual abundance have you rejected because it did not match your ideal vision? How much of your suffering comes not from your actual circumstances, but from your resistance to their imperfection? The Buddha's teaching about dukkha, about the fundamental unsatisfactoriness of all conditioned things, is not meant to make us pessimistic. It is meant to free us from the exhausting and impossible task of making an imperfect world perfect. When we truly understand that imperfection is built into the fabric of existence, we can finally stop fighting against reality itself. This does not mean we become passive or stop trying to improve things. Takeshi continued to work hard and farm skillfully, but he did so from a foundation of acceptance rather than resistance, from a recognition that whatever harvest came would be imperfect, and that this imperfection was not a problem to solve, but simply the nature of conditioned existence. This teaching reaches into every area of our lives. Our relationships will be imperfect. Our work will be imperfect. Our bodies will be imperfect. Our minds will be imperfect. Our achievements will be imperfect. Not sometimes. Not because we are doing something wrong. Always. Because this is the nature of everything that arises and passes away in the conditioned world. When we truly take this in, it is simultaneously sobering and liberating. Sobering because we must give up the fantasy that perfection is possible. Liberating because we no longer need to exhaust ourselves pursuing it. We can work with what is. We can improve what can be improved. We can accept what cannot be changed. And we can find peace in the recognition that our worth is not determined by our ability to achieve the impossible. As you rest here tonight, you might let this understanding settle gently into your awareness. You do not need to be perfect. The harvest does not need to be perfect. This day does not need to have been perfect. You are already enough exactly as you are, imperfections and all. This is not settling for less. This is finally seeing clearly what has always been true. There is an aspect of embracing imperfection that the Buddha taught with particular care and wisdom. It is the understanding that our imperfections are not random defects, but are actually intimately connected to our strengths. That the very qualities we judge as flaws are often inseparable from the qualities we value most about ourselves. This teaching helps us see that we cannot simply cut away our imperfections like removing weeds from a garden. We are integrated wholes, not collections of separate good and bad parts. When we try to eliminate what we judge as wrong about ourselves, we often damage what is right about ourselves in the process. The Buddha used the metaphor of the tree. A tree's strength comes from its deep roots, but those same roots can break through pathways and disrupt foundations. Its shade provides cool relief, but that shade prevents other plants from growing beneath it. Its fruit feeds many creatures, but the fallen fruit can rot and create mess. We cannot have the tree's benefits without its challenges. They arise together from the same nature. Our human qualities are like this. The person who is passionate and enthusiastic will also sometimes be impulsive and overwhelming. The person who is careful and thoughtful will also sometimes be slow to act and prone to overthinking. The person who is sensitive and empathetic will also sometimes be easily hurt and overly affected by others' emotions. These are not separate traits, but different expressions of the same underlying nature. When we understand this, we become more humble about our judgments of what is good and bad in ourselves. We recognize that what we call imperfections are often simply the shadow side of our strengths, and that accepting ourselves fully means accepting both sides of our nature, working skillfully with them rather than trying to eliminate one half while keeping the other. Let us explore a story that illuminates this teaching. In a small town known for its gardens and flowers, there lived a young woman named Hana, whose name meant flower. From childhood, she had possessed an extraordinary sensitivity to beauty. She could see subtle gradations of color that others missed. She could arrange flowers in ways that moved people to tears. She had an almost supernatural ability to create beauty wherever she went. This gift brought her great success. By her early 20s, Hana had become the most sought-after garden designer in the region. Wealthy families would pay handsomely for her to design their gardens. Her work was celebrated and admired. People would travel great distances just to see the gardens she had created. But this same sensitivity that was her greatest gift was also her deepest struggle. Hana was not only sensitive to beauty, she was sensitive to everything. Harsh words would wound her for days. Conflict of any kind would leave her shaken and unable to work. The suffering she saw in the world, even small things like a wilting plant or a bird with an injured wing, would affect her so deeply that she would sometimes be unable to function. She tried desperately to keep only the good part of her sensitivity and eliminate the difficult part. She would tell herself to toughen up, to not be so affected by everything, to develop a thicker skin. She saw her emotional vulnerability as a flaw, a weakness, something wrong with her that needed to be fixed. But no matter how hard she tried, she could not separate these aspects of herself. On days when she successfully numbed herself to emotional pain, she found that her ability to see and create beauty was also diminished. When she managed to become less affected by suffering, her gardens somehow became less alive, less moving, more technically correct, but less soulful. This frustrated and confused her. Why could she not keep the gift and eliminate the burden? Why did her strength and her weakness seem so tangled together? One spring, Hana was commissioned to design a garden for a monastery where a renowned teacher named Master Dai lived. She was honored by the commission, but also anxious. She had heard that Master Dai was known for his penetrating insight into people's hearts and minds. Hana spent weeks designing and planting the monastery garden. She created a space of exquisite beauty, with carefully placed stones, a small pond, and flowers arranged to bloom in succession throughout the seasons. It was some of her finest work. When the garden was complete, Master Dai invited Hana to walk through it with him. They moved slowly through the space, the master occasionally pausing to observe a particular plant or view. Hana waited nervously for his response, hoping for approval, but also feeling the familiar vulnerability that came with showing her work. Finally, Master Dai turned to her. "This garden is beautiful, but tell me, why do you suffer so much?" Hana was startled by the question. "How did you know I suffer?" The master smiled gently. "Your garden shows it. Every plant is placed with such care, as if you are afraid of causing any harm. Every arrangement speaks of someone who feels deeply, who sees deeply, who hurts deeply. This is not a criticism. This depth of feeling is what makes your work extraordinary. But I sense you are at war with this part of yourself." Tears came to Hana's eyes before she could stop them. She found herself telling this stranger, this wise teacher, what she had told no one else. About her sensitivity that felt like both gift and curse, about her desperate attempts to toughen herself, to keep only the good part and eliminate the painful part, about her growing despair that she could not seem to separate these aspects of herself. Master Dai listened with complete attention. When Hana finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to a rose bush that Hana had planted near the garden's entrance. He gestured to it. "Tell me about this rose," he said. Hana described it. It was a rare variety, known for its extraordinary fragrance and the deep crimson of its petals. It bloomed abundantly, and its scent could perfume an entire garden. "And the thorns?" Master Dai asked. Hana looked at the sharp thorns covering the stems. She had been pricked by them several times while planting. "They are unfortunate," she said. "I wish the rose could be this beautiful without them." "Have you ever seen a thornless rose with the same depth of color and fragrance as this one?" Hana thought about it. "No," she admitted. "The thornless varieties are usually paler, less fragrant. They are prettier, perhaps, but less striking. "This is what I want you to understand," Master Dai said gently. "The rose's thorns and its beauty grow from the same root, from the same life force. The plant produces both from the same nature. You cannot have this extraordinary flower without the thorns that protect it. They are not separate things, but expressions of the same vitality." He turned to look at Hana directly. "Your sensitivity is like this. It is not two things, a gift and a flaw. It is one thing expressing itself in different ways. The same openness that allows you to see beauty others miss also means you feel pain others might not notice. The same depth that allows you to create gardens that move people to tears also means you are moved to tears more easily. You cannot separate these because they are the same capacity, manifesting in different circumstances." "But it hurts so much," Hana said quietly. "Sometimes I wish I could be less sensitive, even if it meant creating less beautiful gardens." "That is your choice to make," Master Dai said. "You can close down your sensitivity. Many people do. They decide the pain is not worth the gift. But understand what you would be choosing. You would not be removing thorns from a rose. You would be choosing a different kind of flower entirely. A flower that is perhaps safer, more comfortable, but also less vibrant, less alive, less itself." He began walking again, and Hana followed. "The question is not how to keep your gift without your vulnerability. The question is whether you can embrace your nature fully, thorns and flowers both, working skillfully with both, rather than fighting against half of yourself." Over the following months, Hana thought deeply about Master Dai's teaching. She began to notice how her attempts to toughen herself, to be less sensitive, were actually a rejection of her own nature. She was treating part of herself as an enemy, as something wrong that needed to be eliminated. She started to experiment with a different approach. Instead of trying to eliminate her sensitivity, she began learning to work with it more skillfully. When she felt overwhelmed by suffering, instead of judging herself as too weak, she would acknowledge that her heart was responding naturally to pain. She would take time to care for herself, to rest, to let the intense feelings move through her. She also began to see her emotional vulnerability not as a flaw to hide, but as an integral part of her gift. When clients would come to her upset or troubled, her sensitivity allowed her to understand what they needed, even when they could not articulate it. Her gardens became places of healing because she understood suffering so intimately. What Hana discovered was that she did not need to be different. She needed to be more fully herself, more accepting of all aspects of her nature. The sensitivity that brought her pain was inseparable from the sensitivity that brought her joy and that allowed her to create beauty. They were one thing, not two. Years later, when young artists would come to Hana feeling tormented by their own sensitivities, she would take them to see roses. She would show them the thorns and the flowers growing from the same stem, fed by the same roots. And she would tell them what Master Dai had taught her. You cannot have your gifts without their challenges. The passionate artist will also be temperamental. The meticulous craftsperson will also struggle with perfectionism. The visionary will also sometimes be impractical. These are not separate traits, but different faces of the same nature. The question is not how to eliminate half of yourself. The question is how to work skillfully with your whole self. Thorns and flowers both. Take a gentle breath here and consider what this teaching might be showing you. What imperfections in yourself have you been trying to eliminate? And what if those very imperfections are inseparable from your greatest strengths? What if they are not defects, but simply the thorns that come with your particular roses? This understanding brings a different quality to self-acceptance. We are not accepting our flaws in spite of being good people. We are recognizing that our flaws and gifts are woven together, that we are integrated wholes who cannot be divided into good parts worth keeping and bad parts worth discarding. The person who is determinedly independent and self-reliant might also struggle to ask for help when they need it. The person who is deeply loyal and committed might also have difficulty letting go of relationships that are no longer healthy. The person who is intellectually curious and analytical might also overthink everything and struggle to simply be present. None of these pairings are accidents. They are different expressions of the same underlying nature. And when we understand this, we can stop waging war against ourselves. We can stop trying to be some other type of person who has different gifts and different challenges. We can work with who we actually are. This does not mean we cannot grow or change. Hana learned to work more skillfully with her sensitivity. She developed practices for caring for herself when overwhelmed. She got better at setting boundaries, but she did this while accepting her sensitive nature, not while fighting against it. She worked with the rose she was, thorns and all, rather than trying to become a different flower. The Buddha taught about working with our own nature rather than against it. He talked about different personality types needing different practices. He understood that some people are naturally more intellectual, while others are more devotional, some more solitary, while others more communal, some more energetic, while others more contemplative. He did not try to make everyone the same. He helped each person work skillfully with their own unique nature. This is the wisdom of embracing imperfection at a deep level. Recognizing that our imperfections are not random problems, but are often the shadow side of our light. That we are not broken people in need of fixing, but complete people in need of understanding and skillful work with our own nature. As you rest here tonight, you might hold this question gently. What if your imperfections are not obstacles to your development, but are actually part of your path? What if the very things you have been trying to eliminate are inseparable from the things you most value about yourself? What if embracing imperfection means accepting the whole rose, thorns and flowers together, and learning to work skillfully with both? You do not need to answer these questions tonight. Just let them rest in your awareness. Let the teaching of the rose settle into your understanding. You are not a mistake in need of correction. You are a whole being, thorns and flowers both, growing from the same roots, expressions of the same life force, perfect in your imperfection. The Buddha taught something that many people find surprising. He taught that our suffering is often not caused by external circumstances, but by our relationship to those circumstances. Two people can experience the same event and have entirely different levels of suffering based not on what happened, but on how they hold what happened in their minds and hearts. This teaching is crucial for understanding how to embrace imperfection. The imperfections themselves are often not the problem. Our resistance to them, our stories about what they mean, our belief that they should not exist, this is what creates much of our suffering. There is a teaching story the Buddha told about two arrows. We explored this briefly at the beginning of our journey tonight, but now we can look at it more deeply in the context of imperfection. The Buddha said that when something painful happens, it is like being struck by an arrow. This is the first arrow. If we stub our toe, that pain is the first arrow. If we make a mistake at work, the embarrassment is the first arrow. If we have a physical limitation, the restriction is the first arrow. These first arrows are often unavoidable. They are part of living in an imperfect world, in an imperfect body with imperfect knowledge and skills. We cannot prevent all first arrows. But then comes the crucial choice point. Most of us immediately shoot ourselves with a second arrow. This second arrow is our reaction to the first arrow. It is the story we tell about what the first arrow means. It is our resistance, our judgment, our shame, our despair about the fact that the first arrow struck us. If we stub our toe, the second arrow is, I am so clumsy. I never pay attention. This always happens to me. If we make a mistake at work, the second arrow is, I am incompetent. Everyone will think I am a failure. I should not have this job. If we have a physical limitation, the second arrow is, my body is broken. I should be able to do what others do. Something is wrong with me. The Buddha's insight was that the second arrow often causes far more suffering than the first. And unlike the first arrow, the second arrow is optional. We do this to ourselves. We can learn to recognize when we are reaching for that second arrow and choose to put it down. This teaching transforms how we work with imperfection. The imperfections themselves are first arrows. They exist. They may be uncomfortable or challenging, but they are simply what is. The suffering we create by judging ourselves for having these imperfections, by believing we should be different, by treating our flaws as evidence of our fundamental unworthiness, this is all second arrow territory. And this is where we have power to change our experience. Let us explore a story about someone learning to recognize and release the second arrow. In a village by the sea, there lived a fisherman named Isamu who had worked the waters since boyhood. Fishing was in his blood. His father had been a fisherman, and his grandfather before him. Isamu loved the work, the early mornings on the water, the skill required to read the currents and weather, the satisfaction of a good catch. But when Isamu was in his mid-30s, he developed a chronic pain condition in his hands. The exact cause was unclear. Perhaps decades of pulling nets. Perhaps heredity. Perhaps simply bad luck. The pain was not constant, but it was frequent enough to interfere with his work. On days when the pain was bad, Isamu could not grip the nets properly. His hands would cramp and weaken. He would have to stop working earlier than planned, or sometimes could not go out at all. This was the first arrow, the physical pain and limitation. But Isamu's suffering went far beyond the physical discomfort. He shot himself with many second arrows. He told himself he was becoming useless. He compared himself to other fishermen who had no such limitations. He felt ashamed when he had to ask his son to handle tasks he could once do easily. He worried constantly that he would become a burden to his family, unable to provide as a father and husband should. The second arrows multiplied. I should not have this pain. A real fisherman would push through. Something is wrong with me. I am becoming weak. What kind of man cannot even grip a net? These thoughts tormented him far more than the actual pain in his hands. His wife, a wise woman named Chiyo, watched her husband's increasing despair with concern. She could see that he was suffering, but she also sensed that much of his suffering was coming from how he was thinking about his condition rather than from the condition itself. One evening, Isamu came home early from the water, his hands cramping badly. He sat at the table with his head in his hands, the picture of defeat. Chiyo sat down across from him and asked gently, "Tell me what you are feeling right now." Isamu looked up, his eyes red. "My hands hurt. I cannot do my work. I am failing as a fisherman and as a husband. I am useless." Chiyo listened. Then she asked another question. "Can you separate those things for me? Can you tell me what is actually happening versus what you are thinking about what is happening?" Isamu was confused. "It is all the same thing. My hands hurt and I cannot work. That is reality." "Let us look more carefully," Chiyo said. "What is actually true in this moment? What is the physical reality?" Isamu thought. "My hands are painful. The pain is maybe a 6 out of 10 right now. I had to stop working after 4 hours instead of my usual 8. "Okay," Chiyo said. "Those are facts. Now tell me the rest. Tell me all the things you were thinking as you came home." And so Isamu poured out the second arrows. All his thoughts about being useless, about failing, about what this meant about him as a man and a provider. All his comparisons to other fishermen. All his fears about the future. All his shame about needing help. Chiyo listened to everything. Then she asked, "Are those things facts? Or are those things thoughts about facts?" Isamu paused. He had never made this distinction before. "I suppose they are thoughts, but they feel true." "I understand they feel true," Chiyo said, "but let us examine them. You say you are useless. Is that actually true? Did you not catch fish for 4 hours today? Did you not mend nets yesterday? Do you not still provide for this family? Do you not still teach our son the knowledge you have accumulated over 30 years? Isamu had to admit these things were true. You say you are failing as a fisherman, but are you? Or are you a fisherman who sometimes has pain that limits his hours? Are those the same thing? Isamu sat with this question. It had never occurred to him that he could be a fisherman who had limitations without being a failed fisherman. The two had seemed inseparable in his mind. Chio reached across and gently took his painful hands in hers. Your hands hurt. That is real. That is difficult. I am not asking you to pretend it does not hurt or that it does not create challenges, but everything else, all the stories about what this means about your worth, about your manhood, about your future, those are extra. Those are the weight you are adding on top of the actual difficulty. She squeezed his hands softly. The pain in your hands is enough to carry. You do not need to also carry all these heavy stories about being useless and weak. Those stories are not helping you manage the pain. They are just making everything heavier. Something cracked open in Isamu in that moment. He saw suddenly how much extra suffering he had been creating with his thoughts. The pain was the pain. It was real, and it was challenging. But the shame, the self-judgment, the catastrophic fears about the future, all of that was something he was doing to himself. Over the following weeks and months, Isamu practiced what Chio had shown him. When pain came, he would notice it. Hands hurting today. Pain level about 6. Will need to work shorter hours. These were facts. Then he would notice the second arrows starting to fly. Thoughts about being useless. Thoughts about failing. And increasingly, he could recognize these as thoughts, not facts. As extra weight he was adding, not inherent parts of the situation. Some days he was skillful at this and could keep most of the second arrows at bay. Other days the old patterns were strong and he would find himself deep in shame and despair before he realized what was happening. But gradually, the practice became more natural. He learned to separate the first arrow of the actual pain from the second arrows of his judgments about that pain. What Isamu discovered was remarkable. The pain in his hands did not go away. Some days it was better, some days worse, but the condition remained. Yet his suffering decreased dramatically, not because his circumstances changed, but because his relationship to his circumstances changed. He was still a fisherman, just one who sometimes had to work shorter hours or ask for help. This was simply a fact, not a commentary on his worth. He still provided for his family, just sometimes in different ways. He still had dignity and purpose, even with limitations. Years later, Isamu's son began to develop similar pain in his hands. It seemed to run in the family. The son came to his father worried and discouraged, fearing what this might mean for his future as a fisherman. Isamu listened with deep understanding. Then he told his son about the 2 arrows, about how the pain is the first arrow and cannot always be avoided, but about how all the judgments and stories we add are second arrows that we shoot ourselves, and about how recognizing the difference can transform our experience even when our circumstances do not change. The pain is real, Isamu told his son. Do not ignore it or pretend it is not there. Take care of your hands. Rest when you need to. Adapt your work as necessary. But do not add all the extra suffering of believing this makes you less of a man or less of a fisherman. That extra suffering is optional, and it helps no one. His son listened, and though Isamu knew the understanding would have to develop through the young man's own experience, he hoped he had planted something valuable, the recognition that we have more control over our suffering than we often realize. That much of what we endure is not necessary, not inevitable, but created by our own minds through our resistance to what is. Take a slow breath and notice what this teaching might be showing you. How many second arrows are you carrying right now? How much of your suffering about your imperfections comes from the imperfections themselves, and how much comes from your judgments about having them? The physical limitation in Isamu's hands was the first arrow. The shame, self-judgment, and catastrophic thinking were second arrows. The Buddha's teaching does not promise to eliminate all first arrows. Life in a body, in a world, in relationships, brings challenges and difficulties. We will have physical limitations, make mistakes, experience loss, face obstacles. These are part of being human. But the second arrows, these we can work with. We can learn to recognize when we are adding extra suffering through our resistance and judgment. We can practice meeting our imperfections with acceptance rather than self-attack. We can separate what is actually happening from the stories we tell about what it means. This is not positive thinking or pretending everything is fine. Isamu's hands still hurt. The limitation was real, but he could acknowledge the difficulty without adding the crushing weight of shame and self-judgment on top of it. He could work with what was rather than exhausting himself wishing it were different. This teaching applies to every type of imperfection we might struggle with. The person who tends toward anxiety might shoot themselves with second arrows of shame about being anxious, judgment that they should be calmer, fears that anxiety means something is wrong with them. The anxiety is the first arrow. All the rest is extra. The person who struggles with a difficult personality trait might shoot themselves with second arrows of self-hatred, comparison to others who do not have this trait, belief that they are fundamentally flawed. The trait is the first arrow. The self-hatred is the second. The person who has physical characteristics they dislike might shoot themselves with second arrows of shame, belief that they are unworthy because of how they look, constant comparison to others. The characteristic is the first arrow. The shame and comparison are second arrows. In each case, the Buddha's teaching invites us to notice the difference, to see clearly what is actually happening versus what we are adding to it, to recognize that much of our suffering is optional, created by our resistance to what is rather than by what is itself. This recognition is profoundly liberating. We may still have challenges and limitations, but we no longer have to carry the additional burden of believing these challenges means something is wrong with us fundamentally. We can meet our imperfections with kindness rather than cruelty, with acceptance rather than resistance, with curiosity about how to work skillfully with them rather than shame that they exist at all. As you rest here tonight, you might practice this noticing. When you become aware of some imperfection, some limitation, some way you fall short of your ideals, see if you can separate the first arrow from the second arrows. See if you can acknowledge what is actually present without adding all the extra weight of judgment about what it means. The imperfection exists. That is the first arrow. Everything else, all the stories about being broken or wrong or not enough, those are second arrows, and you can begin to put them down. Not all at once, not perfectly, but moment by moment, gently recognizing the difference between what is and what you are adding to what is. This is how we begin to embrace imperfection at the deepest level, not by celebrating our flaws or pretending they do not exist, but by meeting them without the violence of self-rejection, by seeing them clearly as they are, first arrows only, without shooting ourselves with the second arrows that create so much unnecessary suffering. There is a particular kind of imperfection that causes many people deep suffering. It is the imperfection of not being where we think we should be in life, not having achieved what we think we should have achieved by now, not being as far along on our path as we believe we ought to be. The Buddha understood this suffering intimately. He saw people tormenting themselves not because of where they actually were, but because of the gap between where they were and where they thought they should be. This gap, this imaginary distance between reality and expectation, becomes a source of constant pain. We compare ourselves to others who seem further ahead. We measure ourselves against milestones we believe we should have reached. We judge our progress as too slow, our development as insufficient, our accomplishments as inadequate. And all of this comparison and judgment creates a unique kind of suffering. The wisdom of embracing imperfection includes accepting where we actually are in our journey, not where we wish we were, not where we think we should be, but where we are right now, in this moment, with whatever progress we have made and whatever distance we still have to travel. This acceptance does not mean giving up on growth or abandoning our aspirations. It means meeting ourselves where we are with honesty and kindness, rather than with comparison and judgment. It means recognizing that everyone's path unfolds at its own pace, in its own way, according to countless conditions we cannot fully control or understand. Let us explore a story that illuminates this teaching. In a monastery dedicated to scholarly study and meditation, there lived a monk named Takeshi who had arrived full of enthusiasm and determination. He had read extensively about Buddhist practice before ordaining. He had heard stories of monks who achieved profound realizations after years of dedicated practice. He had a vision of the monk he would become, wise, peaceful, accomplished in both study and meditation. But now, 5 years into his monastic life, Takeshi was discouraged and ashamed. He felt he had made almost no progress. His meditation was still scattered and difficult. His understanding of the teachings felt shallow compared to other monks who had ordained at the same time. His character flaws, the impatience and pride he had hoped to overcome, seemed as strong as ever. He would look at senior monks who had been practicing for 20 or 30 years and feel despair at the vast distance between their attainment and his own. He would see monks his own age who seemed to grasp teachings more quickly or sit in meditation more peacefully, and he would feel like a failure. The comparison was constant and exhausting. In study sessions, he would measure his understanding against others. In meditation, he would wonder if everyone else was having deeper experiences. Even in simple work practice, he would judge his effort as inferior, his progress as too slow. This constant self-judgment created a heavy atmosphere around Takeshi. Other monks noticed that he seemed burdened, though they did not know why. His teacher, an elderly monk named Genpo, watched with concern as Takechi's enthusiasm slowly transformed into grim determination and then into something close to despair. One autumn day, Master Genpo invited Takeshi to walk with him in the monastery's garden. They walked in silence for a while, passing through areas planted with different trees. Finally, the master stopped beside 2 maple trees growing near each other. "Tell me what you see," Master Genpo said. Takeshi looked at the trees. One was tall and full, its branches spread wide, its leaves brilliant red. The other was smaller, more sparse, its leaves just beginning to turn color. "I see 2 maple trees," Takeshi said. "One is mature and beautiful. The other is younger and not as developed." "Look more carefully," the master instructed. "How old do you think each tree is?" Takeshi examined them more closely. The large one looks perhaps 30 years old. The smaller one, maybe 15. "And if I told you they were both planted at exactly the same time, on the same day 20 years ago, what would you think?" Takeshi was surprised. How could they be the same age when one was so much larger and more developed than the other? "Come," Master Genpo said, leading him closer. "Look at where they are planted." Takeshi looked and suddenly understood. The larger tree was planted in rich soil in a spot that received full sunlight throughout the day. The smaller tree was planted in rockier soil, partially shaded by a building. "The trees are the same age," Master Genpo said. "They have had the same amount of time to grow, but they have not had the same conditions. One has had rich soil, full sun, protection from wind. The other has had rocky soil, partial shade, exposure to harsh weather." Is the smaller tree failing at being a tree? Is it doing something wrong? No, Daichi said quietly. It is doing the best it can with the conditions it has. Exactly. And if the smaller tree spent its energy judging itself for not being as tall as the other tree, if it compared itself constantly and felt ashamed of its slower growth, would that help it grow faster? Daichi shook his head. Or would it simply suffer uselessly while growing at whatever pace its conditions allow? The teaching was landing, but Daichi felt resistance. But trees do not have choice. I could work harder, practice more diligently. Maybe if I were more dedicated, I would progress faster. Master Genpo nodded. Perhaps. Or perhaps you are already practicing as diligently as your current conditions allow. Perhaps there are factors in your development, your past experiences, your personality, your life circumstances that are like the rocky soil and partial shade, not excuses for giving up, but realities that affect the pace of your growth. He gestured back toward the smaller tree. This tree is still a tree. It provides shade, though less than its neighbor. It produces seeds that will become new trees. It turns carbon dioxide into oxygen. It is fulfilling its tree nature even while being smaller than another tree of the same age. Is your practice any less valid because it looks different from someone else's practice? They began walking again, and Master Genpo continued. I have been teaching for 40 years. I have seen hundreds of monks come through this monastery, and I will tell you something I have observed. The pace of spiritual development is not determined primarily by effort or dedication, though these matter. It is determined by a mysterious combination of causes and conditions that we cannot fully understand or control. Some people have minds that naturally settle easily in meditation. Others struggle for years before finding stability. Some people have backgrounds that prepared them for monastic life. Others carry wounds and patterns that require much healing before deeper practice can unfold. Some are planted in rich soil, others in rocky ground. He stopped walking and looked directly at Daichi. Your practice is your practice. Your pace is your pace. Comparing yourself to others and judging yourself for not progressing faster is like the smaller tree resenting the larger one. It is a complete waste of energy that could be used for actual growth. But how do I know if I am progressing at all? Daichi asked. How do I know I am not just stagnating? Master Genpo smiled. Are you the same person who arrived here 5 years ago? Daichi thought about this. No, he admitted. I am different in many ways. More patient than I was, though still impatient. More aware of my mind's patterns, though still caught by them often. More able to live simply, though I still crave comfort sometimes. That is progress, the master said simply. It may not be as dramatic or fast as you hoped. It may not look like other people's progress, but it is real change happening at the pace your particular conditions allow. The question is whether you can honor this progress without comparing it to some imaginary ideal of where you should be. Over the following months, Daichi worked with this teaching. It was not easy. The habit of comparison was deeply ingrained. He would catch himself measuring his meditation against others, judging his understanding as insufficient, feeling ashamed of how far he still had to go. But increasingly, he could also recognize these comparisons as they arose. He could see them as the second arrows they were, extra suffering he was creating beyond whatever actual challenges he faced in his practice. And sometimes he could simply acknowledge where he actually was without the overlay of judgment. I have been practicing for 5 years. My meditation is still difficult, but less chaotic than it was. My understanding has deepened in some areas and remains shallow in others. This is where I am. This is the tree I am, growing in my particular soil at my particular pace. What Daichi discovered was that this acceptance did not lead to stagnation, as he had feared. Instead, It created space for genuine growth. When he stopped exhausting himself with comparison and self-judgment, he had more energy for actual practice. When he met himself where he was with kindness rather than criticism, he could see more clearly what he actually needed to work on rather than what he thought he should already have mastered. 10 years after that conversation in the garden, Daichi was walking with a younger monk who was expressing the same frustrations Daichi had once felt. The young monk felt he was progressing too slowly, that he should be further along by now, that something must be wrong with him. Daichi took the young monk to see the two maple trees. They were both much larger now. The one that had been full and beautiful was now magnificent, towering and spreading. The one that had been smaller and sparse was now also substantial, though still not as large as its companion. These trees were planted on the same day, Daichi told the young monk, sharing what Master Genpo had taught him years before. They have had the same amount of time but different conditions. And look, the smaller one is no longer so small. It has grown steadily in its own way, at its own pace. He turned to the young monk. Your progress may not look like someone else's progress. Your pace may not match your expectations. But if you are practicing sincerely, you are growing. The question is whether you can trust this growth without constant comparison, whether you can honor where you are without judging it as insufficient. The young monk listened, and Daichi could see his own younger self in the monk's uncertain expression. He knew the teaching would have to deepen through the young man's own experience over time. But he hoped he had planted something valuable, as Master Genpo had once done for him. Take a gentle breath and notice what this story might be showing you. Where in your life have you been judging yourself for not being further along? Where have you been comparing your growth to others and finding yourself insufficient? Where have you been planted in rocky soil while measuring yourself against trees in rich earth? The Buddha taught that spiritual development unfolds according to causes and conditions, many of which are beyond our immediate control. Our past experiences shape our present capacities. Our personalities influence how we learn and grow. Our life circumstances affect what is possible in each phase of our journey. This does not mean we are helpless or that effort does not matter. We can work with our conditions skillfully. We can practice diligently. We can seek good teachers and beneficial circumstances. But we cannot force growth to happen faster than the conditions allow, any more than the maple tree can force itself to grow faster in rocky soil. What we can do is meet ourselves where we are with acceptance and kindness. We can recognize our actual progress rather than dismissing it because it does not match our expectations. We can honor the unique path we are on rather than judging it as inferior to someone else's path. This teaching about accepting where we are is not about complacency or giving up. Daichi continued to practice earnestly. The smaller maple tree continued to grow, but both did so without the added burden of constant comparison and self-judgment, without the exhausting belief that they should be somewhere other than where they were. When we embrace the imperfection of being where we are, not where we wish we were, something profound shifts. We stop wasting energy on useless comparison. We start working more skillfully with our actual circumstances rather than fighting against them. We begin to see the real progress we have made rather than only the imagined progress we have not made. You are where you are for reasons. Some of those reasons you understand, many you do not. Some of those reasons you can change, many you cannot. But wherever you are right now is your starting point for the next step, not where you think you should be, not where someone else is, but where you actually are, in reality, in this moment. Can you meet yourself here with kindness? Can you acknowledge the growth you have already achieved, even if it feels insufficient? Can you trust that if you continue practicing, continue learning, continue showing up with sincerity, you will continue to grow at whatever pace your conditions allow? This is not a surrender to mediocrity. It is a recognition of reality. The smaller maple tree is not mediocre. It is a tree fulfilling its nature, growing in its particular circumstances. You are not mediocre for being where you are. You are a human being, learning and growing, unfolding in your particular circumstances. The comparison that creates so much suffering is built on a false premise. The premise that everyone should progress at the same rate, in the same way, regardless of their different starting points and different conditions. But this is like expecting all trees to grow at the same rate, regardless of soil, sun, water, and weather. It is a denial of how growth actually works. When we let go of this false premise, we can finally appreciate the growth that is actually happening. The small increments that we previously dismissed as insufficient. The subtle changes that do not look dramatic, but are real. The gradual unfolding that is our particular path at our particular pace. As you rest here tonight, you might offer yourself this acceptance. You are where you are, not where you wish you were, not where others are, but where you actually are, which is exactly where you need to be to take the next step on your unique path. This is not failure. This is simply reality. And meeting reality with acceptance rather than resistance is the foundation of all genuine peace and growth. The Buddha once told a story about a farmer who was so impatient for his crops to grow that he went out into his fields at night and pulled on the shoots to make them grow faster. Of course, this did not help the plants grow. It damaged them. His impatience and his refusal to accept the natural pace of growth created harm rather than benefit. We do this to ourselves when we cannot accept where we are. We pull on ourselves, demanding faster growth, more dramatic progress, immediate transformation. And like the farmer pulling on his crops, we often damage ourselves in the process. The crops grow at their own pace, responding to sun and rain and soil. We grow at our own pace, responding to our circumstances and conditions and sincere effort. Accepting this is not giving up. It is finally working with reality rather than against it. It is the wisdom of the smaller maple tree, which grows steadily in rocky soil without comparing itself to the tree in rich earth. You are enough, right where you are, not because you have arrived at some destination, but because where you are is real, valid, and exactly where your path has brought you so far. From here, you continue, at your pace, in your way, growing in your particular soil, under your particular conditions, becoming more fully yourself with each season that passes. There is another dimension to embracing imperfection that the Buddha taught with great care. It is the recognition that our imperfections can actually serve others. That what we see as our flaws and failures might be exactly what allows us to understand, help, and connect with other people in their struggles. This is a profound reversal of how we usually think about imperfection. We typically believe we must overcome all our flaws before we can be of genuine help to others. That we must perfect ourselves before we deserve to guide anyone else. That our struggles and limitations disqualify us from being of service. But the Buddha taught something different. He taught that our direct experience of suffering, of imperfection, of struggling and failing is exactly what develops our compassion and wisdom. That it is often our wounds that allow us to recognize and tend to the wounds of others. There is a word in Buddhism, karuna, which means compassion. But its deeper meaning is even more beautiful. It means the quivering of the heart in response to suffering. Not a distant sympathy, but a resonance, a shared feeling, a recognition of common humanity in pain. This kind of compassion does not arise from perfection. It arises from our own intimate knowledge of what it means to suffer, to struggle, to fall short, to fail. Our imperfections are not obstacles to compassion. They are the very ground from which genuine compassion grows. Let us explore a story that shows this teaching clearly. In a town known for its healing temple, there lived a physician named Akiko who was respected throughout the region for her medical knowledge and skill. She had studied extensively, learned from renowned masters, and practiced her craft with dedication for many years. When people were sick, they sought her out, trusting in her expertise and precision. Akiko took pride in her competence. She approached medicine scientifically, diagnosing carefully, prescribing accurately, treating effectively. Her patients generally recovered well under her care. She was good at what she did, and she knew it. But there was something that troubled Akiko, though she rarely admitted it, even to herself. She noticed that while her patients respected her skill, they did not seem to feel deeply comforted by her presence. They came to her for her knowledge, but they did not seem to feel truly seen or understood by her. This puzzled Akiko. She was doing everything correctly. She was providing excellent medical care. What else could patients want? One winter, Akiko herself fell seriously ill. It was a rare condition, difficult to diagnose, painful, and frightening. For the first time in her adult life, she was not the healer, but the patient. Not the one in control, but the one vulnerable and afraid. She went to see a physician in a neighboring town, a woman named Dr. Tomoko, who was known for her healing abilities. When Akiko arrived at Dr. Tomoko's clinic, weak and anxious, she was struck by something unexpected. Dr. Tomoko's clinic was not as pristine as Akiko's own. The equipment was older. The space was smaller and more cluttered. By Akiko's standards, it was less professional, less impressive. And yet, from the moment she entered, Akiko felt something she had not expected. She felt safe. Dr. Tomoko listened to Akiko describe her symptoms with complete attention. She asked questions not just about the physical manifestations, but about how Akiko was feeling emotionally, what she was afraid of, how the illness was affecting her life. When Akiko's voice broke describing her fear, Dr. Tomoko's eyes filled with empathy. "I know how frightening this is," Dr. Tomoko said softly. "To have your body betray you, to not know what is wrong, or if you will recover. I understand this fear." Something in the way she said this made Akiko ask, "Have you been seriously ill?" Dr. Tomoko nodded. "Several years ago, I had a condition that took me to the edge of death. I spent months recovering. It changed everything about how I practice medicine." She examined Akiko gently, her touch conveying care as much as clinical assessment. Then she sat down and discussed her diagnosis and treatment plan. Her medical knowledge was solid, though perhaps not quite as extensive as Akiko's own. But what stood out was how she spoke. With a combination of professional competence and deep human understanding. Throughout the weeks of Akiko's treatment, she found herself reflecting on the difference between Dr. Tomoko's care and her own practice. Both were competent physicians. Both knew their medicine well. But Dr. Tomoko brought something extra to her work, something that came not from her knowledge, but from her own experience of vulnerability and suffering. When Akiko expressed fear about a difficult treatment, Dr. Tomoko would acknowledge the fear with understanding. When Akiko felt discouraged about her slow recovery, Dr. Tomoko would share honestly about her own struggles with patients during her illness. When Akiko felt ashamed of her body's weakness, Dr. Tomoko would speak of her own experience of that shame and how she had worked through it. This sharing was never self-indulgent or attention-seeking. It was offered precisely as medicine itself, a way of saying, "You are not alone in this. I have walked this path. I understand in my bones what you are experiencing." As Akiko slowly recovered, she thought deeply about what she had received from Dr. Tomoko. The medical treatment had been competent and appropriate, but the healing had involved something more. It had involved being met by someone who knew from direct experience what suffering felt like. Someone whose own imperfection and vulnerability made her able to truly see and comfort another person's imperfection and vulnerability. When Akiko returned to her own practice, still not fully recovered but well enough to resume seeing patients, she approached her work differently. She did not abandon her medical knowledge or become less precise in her diagnoses, but she allowed herself to be more human with her patients. When a patient expressed fear, instead of just offering reassurance from a place of detached expertise, Akiko would sometimes share briefly about her own recent experience of fear during illness. When a patient felt ashamed of their body's limitations, Akiko would acknowledge her own experience of that shame. When a patient struggled with the vulnerability of being sick, Akiko could speak from knowing what that vulnerability felt like. What happened was remarkable. Akiko's patients began to respond differently to her care. They still respected her medical skill, but now they also felt seen and understood by her. They would relax in her presence in a way they had not before. They would share more honestly about their fears and struggles. The healing that happened extended beyond just the physical body to include the frightened, ashamed, vulnerable human being carrying that body. Years later, a young physician came to study with Akiko. This young doctor, named Keiko, was brilliant and ambitious. She wanted to be the best physician possible, to overcome all her limitations, to be beyond reproach in her medical practice. Akiko recognized her younger self in this driven perfectionism. One day, she told Keiko about her illness and what she had learned from Dr. Tomoko. "I used to think my job was to be the perfect physician," Akiko said, "to have all the answers, to never struggle, to be above the problems my patients faced. I thought my competence was my greatest gift to them." "And what do you think now?" Keiko asked. "Now I understand that my greatest gift is my humanity. My patients do not need me to be perfect. They need me to be skilled, yes, but also to be real. To understand their suffering, not just intellectually, but from having suffered myself. To know what vulnerability feels like from the inside." She looked at the young doctor with kind eyes. "Your struggles, your failures, your experiences of pain and fear and limitation, these are not obstacles to becoming a good healer. They are what will make you a great healer, because they will teach you what no medical text can teach, what it actually feels like to be a suffering human being in need of care." "But should I not try to overcome my weaknesses?" Keiko asked, troubled by this teaching. "Of course, grow and learn and develop your skills," Akiko said. "But do not try to transcend your humanity. Do not try to become some perfect being who has never struggled. Your patients cannot relate to that person. They cannot be comforted by someone who has never known what they are feeling." She gestured to her well-worn medical texts. "These books taught me medicine, but my illness taught me healing. The medicine treats the disease. The healing treats the person. And the healing comes from my willingness to meet my patients, not from a place of superiority, but from a place of shared imperfect humanity. Take a slow breath here and feel what this teaching might be offering you. How many times have you believed your imperfections disqualified you from helping others? How often have you thought you needed to fix yourself completely before you could be of service?" Akiko discovered what the Buddha taught, that our direct experience of suffering is what develops our capacity for compassion, that our struggles are not obstacles to helping others, but are often exactly what allows us to truly understand and serve them. This does not mean we should cultivate dysfunction or celebrate our flaws as if they are virtues. Akiko continued to develop her medical skills and knowledge, but she stopped believing she had to transcend her humanity, her vulnerability, her direct knowledge of what it means to suffer. The Buddha himself taught from his own experience. He did not teach suffering as an abstract concept, but as something he had known intimately. He did not teach about the difficulty of the human condition from a distance, but from having lived it fully. His enlightenment did not erase his humanity, but illuminated it. When we embrace our own imperfections, we become capable of a deeper kind of service. Not service that comes from superior knowledge or perfect technique, but service that comes from genuine understanding. From the quivering of the heart that recognizes, "I know this suffering. I have felt this pain. I understand this struggle. This kind of compassion is not pity looking down on someone from above. It is recognition meeting someone as an equal. It is one imperfect human being reaching out to another with the wisdom that can only come from having walked a similar path. Your struggles with anxiety might be exactly what allows you to truly help someone else struggling with anxiety. Your experience of failure might be exactly what allows you to comfort someone who has failed. Your knowledge of shame might be exactly what allows you to help someone release their shame. Not despite your imperfections, but because of them. This is the profound gift hidden in our flaws. They connect us to others. They develop our compassion. They give us wisdom that cannot be learned from books or from being perfect. They make us capable of a kind of service that perfection could never provide. As you rest here tonight, you might hold this possibility gently, that your imperfections are not just obstacles to overcome, that they might also be gifts that allow you to understand, connect with, and serve other beings. That what you see as your greatest flaws might become your greatest sources of compassion and wisdom. You do not need to be perfect to help others. You need to be human, vulnerable, honest about your own struggles. You need to be willing to meet people not from a place of having transcended all difficulty, but from a place of knowing what difficulty feels like and having found ways to work with it. The Buddha taught that we are all in this together, all struggling with the challenges of human existence, all marked by imperfection and incompleteness. When we embrace our own imperfections, we finally join the rest of humanity. We stop trying to be above it all and start being present with it all. And this presence, this willingness to be fully human, is what allows genuine compassion to flow. We have explored many facets of the Buddha's teaching on embracing imperfection. We have seen how our resistance to imperfection creates suffering beyond the imperfections themselves. We have understood how our flaws are often inseparable from our gifts. We have learned to distinguish the first arrow of actual difficulty from the second arrows of our judgments. We have accepted where we are in our journeys without constant comparison. We have recognized how our struggles can develop compassion and allow us to serve others. Now we arrive at perhaps the most profound aspect of this teaching, the understanding that imperfection is not just acceptable or manageable, but is actually the gateway to something the Buddha called wabi-sabi in the Japanese tradition, the beauty and wisdom that can only be found in what is imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. This is not simply making peace with imperfection. This is discovering that there is a kind of beauty, meaning, and authenticity that exists only in the imperfect. That perfection, even if it were possible, would actually lack something essential. That the cracks and flaws and rough edges are not defacing the beauty, but are part of what makes something truly beautiful. In the aesthetic tradition influenced by Buddhism, there is a deep appreciation for things that show their age, their use, their history. A teeple with a crack repaired with gold. A piece of wood that shows its grain and knots. A garden that includes dying leaves along with fresh blooms. These are not seen as flawed objects that would be better if they were perfect. They are seen as more beautiful, more meaningful, more real precisely because of their imperfections. This aesthetic principle points to a deeper spiritual truth. Life itself is imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. And this is not a tragedy to overcome, but the very nature of existence to embrace and find beauty within. When we stop fighting this reality and instead lean into it, we discover something we could never find in perfection: authenticity, depth, the poignant beauty of things as they actually are. Let us explore a story that shows this understanding emerging. In a city known for its artisans and craftspeople, there lived a master calligrapher named Setsuko. She had studied the art of brush writing since childhood, learning to create characters with perfect proportion, flawless balance, and elegant precision. Her work was highly regarded. Museums displayed her scrolls. Collectors paid premium prices for pieces bearing her signature. Setsuko's calligraphy was technically perfect, Every stroke was executed with precision. Every character was balanced according to classical proportions. Every piece demonstrated complete mastery of traditional forms. And yet, as she entered her 60s, Setsuko began to feel something was missing from her work. Her pieces were admired, but they did not seem to move people deeply. They were correct, beautiful in their technical perfection, but somehow cold. They demonstrated skill, but did not seem to touch the heart. Setsuko could not understand what was lacking. She had achieved everything she had worked toward, complete technical mastery. Why did her work feel increasingly hollow to her? One day, a friend invited Setsuko to visit an exhibition of work by an elderly calligrapher named Master Ren, who lived in a remote mountain village. Setsuko agreed to go, though she had never heard of this master and assumed the work would be provincial and unsophisticated. When she entered the gallery, Setsuko stopped in surprise. The calligraphy on the walls was unlike anything she had seen. The characters were not perfectly balanced. The ink was not uniformly applied. Some strokes were bold and confident, while others were light and tentative. There were places where the brush had hesitated, where the ink had pooled slightly, where the form deviated from classical proportions. By all the standards Setsuko had learned and perfected over decades, this work was flawed. And yet it was breathtaking. Each piece vibrated with life and feeling. You could sense the human being behind the brush, could feel their breath and heartbeat, could see their humanity in every imperfect stroke. Setsuko stood before these scrolls for a long time, something shifting in her understanding. Here was work that violated many technical rules she held sacred. Work that was by conventional standards imperfect. And yet it possessed something her own perfect work lacked: presence, soul, the trace of a real human being fully engaged with the moment of creation. She learned that Master Ren was 85 years old and had been doing calligraphy for 7 decades. She asked her friend to arrange a meeting, needing to understand how this work that seemed so flawed could feel so alive. Master Ren received her in his simple mountain studio. He was a small man with gnarled hands and eyes that held both wisdom and mischief. He invited Setsuko to sit and asked what had brought her to visit an old man in the mountains. Setsuko struggled to articulate what she wanted to know. Finally, she said, "Your work breaks many rules, and yet it moves me more than technically perfect calligraphy. I need to understand why." Master Ren smiled. "Show me your hands." Setsuko held out her hands, uncertain. They were smooth, well cared for, the hands of someone who had avoided hard labor. "Now look at mine," Master Ren said, holding up his own hands. They were weathered and scarred, with prominent veins and twisted fingers affected by arthritis. "These hands shake sometimes," Master Ren said. "They do not always do exactly what I want them to do. When I was younger, I could control the brush perfectly. Now, I must work with hands that have their own ideas, their own limitations, their own wisdom." He picked up a brush. "When I was your age, I too pursued perfect calligraphy. Every stroke had to be exactly right. I would destroy pieces that showed any flaw. But then age came, and illness, and these hands that no longer obeyed perfectly. At first, I despaired. I thought I could no longer do calligraphy." He paused, looking at the brush in his unsteady hand. "But then I learned something. The perfection I had been chasing was dead. It was cold. It was the perfection of a machine, not a human being. When my hands began to shake, when I could no longer control everything, something unexpected happened. My calligraphy became alive." He looked at Setsuko directly. "The hesitation you see in my work, that is real hesitation. The pooling ink, that happened because my hand paused to feel the character more deeply. The irregular strokes, those come from hands that have lived 85 years. All of this that you might call imperfection is actually authenticity. It is the trace of a real human being, not the demonstration of technique. But surely skill and mastery matter. Setsuko protested. Surely we should not just be careless and call it authentic. Of course, skill matters, Master Ren agreed. I practiced for 50 years before my hands began to shake. All that training is present in my work. But now the skill serves something deeper than itself. It serves the expression of this particular moment, this particular breath, this particular human being with all their imperfections. He prepared a piece of paper and lifted his brush. Watch. Master Ren began to write a character. His hand did shake slightly. The stroke wavered in places where a younger hand would have been steady. But there was something in the movement that Setsuko had never seen before. Complete presence, total acceptance. The calligrapher and the calligraphy becoming one thing, not separated by the demand for perfection. When the character was complete, Master Ren set down the brush. See how the stroke moves? It is alive because it was made by something alive. It shows imperfection because everything alive is imperfect. If I could make a perfect stroke, it would be dead. It would be a copy of an ideal, not an expression of reality. He looked at the character with satisfaction. I spent 50 years learning to write perfectly. And then I spent 35 years learning to write imperfectly. The second learning was far more difficult and far more important. Setsuko stayed in the mountains for a week, watching Master Ren work, asking questions, beginning to understand. On her last day, she asked if she could try writing something in his studio. Master Ren prepared materials and invited her to write. Setsuko approached the paper with her customary precision, her trained control. She began a character with perfect technique. Stop, Master Ren said gently. You are showing me your skill. I do not need to see your skill. I want to see you. Setsuko was confused. My skill is me. I have spent my whole life developing it. Your skill is your tool, Master Ren corrected, but you are more than your tools. You are a woman in her 60s who has lived a full life. You have experienced joy and sorrow, success and disappointment, love and loss. Where is all of that in your perfect stroke? Where is the human being who has lived all those years? Setsuko felt something crack open inside her. She realized she had been hiding behind her perfection, using her flawless technique as a way to avoid revealing herself. As long as her calligraphy was technically perfect, she was safe. No one could criticize it, but also, no one could truly see her. She picked up the brush again, but this time she did not try to control everything. She let herself feel the character before writing it. Let herself be present with her breath, her beating heart, her slightly trembling hand, her 6 decades of living. And she wrote. The character that emerged was imperfect by her old standards. The stroke was not as controlled as she usually made it. There was a slight irregularity in the curve. The ink was not uniformly applied, but something else was there. Something real. Something alive. For the first time in years, Setsuko had allowed herself to appear in her work, imperfections and all. Master Ren looked at the character and nodded with a deep smile. There. That is the beginning. You are starting to understand that the imperfections are not defects to eliminate. They are doorways to authenticity. When Setsuko returned to the city, she could no longer work as she had before. Her old pursuit of technical perfection felt empty, but she also could not immediately embrace the kind of freedom she had seen in Master Ren's work. She was caught between 2 ways of practicing, uncertain of her path forward. For months, she struggled. Sometimes she would try to write with more freedom and spontaneity, only to judge the results as sloppy and undisciplined. Other times, she would return to her old perfect technique, only to feel the deadness in it. She was in a difficult transition, letting go of one approach without yet fully embodying another. gradually, over years, Setsuko found her way. She did not abandon technique or become careless. All her training remained as a foundation. But now she allowed something else to enter her work. The slight tremor of a hand that had written for 40 years. The imperfect but authentic mark of a human being fully present in the moment. The beauty that can only be found when we stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be real. Her work changed. The museums and collectors who had bought her earlier perfect pieces were initially puzzled by her new direction. But others began to recognize something in her later work that her earlier pieces had lacked. Depth. Soul. The poignant beauty of imperfection that speaks to something essential about what it means to be human. Setsuko never regretted the transition, though it cost her some of her earlier success and reputation. She had discovered something more valuable than perfection: authenticity. She had learned that the cracks and flaws and irregular marks are not defacing the beauty. They are the beauty when they come from a place of genuine presence rather than carelessness. When young calligraphers would come to study with her in her later years, Setsuko would tell them about Master Ren and what he had taught her. First, learn the rules completely, she would say. Practice until the technique becomes natural. But then, do not stop there. Learn to let the technique serve something deeper. Learn to let your humanity show through. Learn that perfect calligraphy is dead calligraphy. Life always includes imperfection. She would show them Master Ren's work and her own later pieces. See how these characters breathe? See how they show the trace of a real human being. That slight irregularity, that tremor, that place where the ink pooled deep because the hand paused. These are not mistakes. These are the fingerprints of a living presence. Perfect work shows skill but hides the artist, Setsuko would teach. Imperfect work, when it comes from deep practice and genuine presence, reveals the artist and invites connection. We respond to it not because it demonstrates technical mastery, but because it shows us another human being, complete with all their beautiful imperfection. Take a slow breath and feel what this teaching might be offering. What would it mean to stop hiding behind perfection? To allow your humanity to show through in whatever you create or do? To embrace the tremor, the pause, the slight irregularity that proves you are alive and present? The Buddha taught that everything in existence bears the mark of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. But he also taught that when we truly see these marks, when we stop resisting them and instead open to them, we find a quality of beauty and meaning that exists nowhere else. The perfect tea bowl from a factory is uniform and flawless, but it is also generic, anonymous, lacking any particular character. The handmade tea bowl with slight irregularities, with the mark of the potter's hand, with the unexpected variations from the fire, this bowl tells a story. It shows its creation. It reveals its maker. It is unique and irreplaceable in a way the perfect factory bowl can never be. Our lives are like this. We can pursue the perfection of the factory bowl, trying to eliminate every flaw, every irregularity, every trace of our particular humanity. Or we can embrace being handmade, accepting that we will show our origins, our struggles, our limitations, and that this is not a defect, but what makes us real, unique, and meaningful. The Japanese aesthetic of wabi-sabi celebrates the beauty of things that are imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. The weathered wood, the cracked pottery, the asymmetrical arrangement, the autumn leaf beginning to decay. This is not celebrating dysfunction or praising deterioration. For its own sake, it is recognizing that there is a quality of beauty, authenticity, and poignancy in things as they actually are, not as we wish they would be. This aesthetic principle is pointing to a spiritual truth. Life as it actually is, with all its imperfection and impermanence, contains its own complete beauty. We do not need to perfect it, or fix it, or make it into something other than what it is. We need to see it clearly, accept it fully, and allow ourselves to be moved by its fleeting, imperfect, authentic beauty. When we embrace imperfection at this deep level, something remarkable happens. We stop treating our flaws as problems to solve and start seeing them as part of our unique character. We stop hiding our struggles and start allowing them to connect us to others. We stop demanding that everything be permanent and perfect, and instead find beauty in what is temporary and flawed. The calligraphy with the trembling line is more beautiful than the perfect stroke because it shows a real human being. The garden with dying leaves is more authentic than one with only perfect blooms because it shows the full cycle of life. Our lives with their mistakes and limitations and rough edges are more real, more meaningful, more beautiful than any fantasy of perfection could be. This is the final teaching on embracing imperfection, not just accepting it or working with it skillfully, but recognizing it as the very ground of beauty, authenticity, and meaning. Understanding that perfection is not something we failed to achieve. It is something that would be less valuable than what we already have, our real, flawed, authentic, irreplaceable humanity. As you rest here tonight, you might let this understanding settle into your bones. You are not a failed attempt at perfection. You are a unique expression of life, complete with all the marks of your journey. The scars and wrinkles and irregularities are not defacing your beauty. They are your beauty. They tell your story. They prove you have lived. The Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree in a body that would age and die. He taught in words that were imperfect and required interpretation. He built a community of practitioners who struggled and made mistakes. He did not transcend imperfection. He woke up to the beauty and meaning within imperfection. He saw clearly that this is all there is, this imperfect, impermanent, constantly changing reality. And he found it enough. He found it beautiful. He found it worthy of complete love and acceptance. You too are part of this imperfect reality. And you too are enough. You too are beautiful. You too are worthy of complete love and acceptance, exactly as you are, flaws and all, struggles and all, limitations and all. Not in spite of your imperfections, but as a complete package, the light and shadow both, the flowers and thorns together, the perfect imperfection of a real human being. Throughout this journey tonight, we have explored the Buddha's teachings on embracing imperfection from many angles. We have seen how the potter discovered that imperfect pieces held more life than perfect ones. How the meditator learned that accepting his scattered mind was the beginning of real practice. How the farmer found peace when he stopped demanding perfect harvests. How the physician discovered her humanity was her greatest gift to patients. How the calligrapher learned that imperfect marks made by a trembling hand contained more beauty than technically perfect strokes. All of these stories point to the same truth. Imperfection is not our enemy. It is not an obstacle to overcome or a problem to solve. It is the very nature of conditioned existence, and it is beautiful. When we finally stop fighting it and start embracing it, we discover a peace and freedom we could never find through the pursuit of perfection. This peace does not come from achieving anything or fixing anything. It comes from a simple shift in vision, from seeing clearly what has always been true, that we are imperfect beings in an imperfect world, and this is not a tragedy. This is simply what is. And what is, when met with acceptance rather than resistance, when seen clearly rather than through the filter of judgment, is enough. It has always been enough. It will always be enough. The pursuit of perfection is exhausting because it is endless. There is always more to fix, more to improve, more ways we fall short. But the embrace of imperfection brings rest. We can finally stop fighting. We can finally accept ourselves and our lives as they are. we can finally recognize that what we have been treating as our greatest flaws might actually be our greatest teachers, our deepest sources of compassion, and the very things that make us authentically human. This does not mean we stop growing or learning or developing our skills and capacities. The potter continued refining her craft. The meditator continued practicing. The farmer kept working to improve his methods. But they did all of this from a foundation of acceptance rather than self-rejection, from a recognition that they were already complete even as they continued to evolve. This is the paradox at the heart of the Buddha's teaching on imperfection. We are already perfect in our imperfection, already complete in our incompleteness, already whole even with our brokenness. And when we truly understand this, we can work on ourselves without the violence of believing we are fundamentally wrong. We can grow and change while also accepting where we are. We can aspire to be better while also recognizing we are already enough. Take one more gentle breath and let all of these teachings settle. You have traveled through many stories and insights tonight. You do not need to remember everything or apply everything immediately. Just let the essential understanding rest in your awareness that your imperfections are not obstacles to your peace, your growth, or your worth. They are part of the beautiful, authentic, irreplaceable reality of who you are. The Buddha's final teaching before he died was this: all compounded things are impermanent. Work out your own liberation with diligence. He did not say, become perfect, and then feel you will be free. He said, understand that everything is impermanent and imperfect, and work with that reality to find freedom. Freedom is not found by transcending imperfection. It is found by fully accepting it, by meeting ourselves and our lives exactly as they are with wisdom and compassion, by recognizing that the cracks are where the light gets in, that the rough edges are what allow us to hold on to each other, that the flaws and struggles and limitations are what make us real, what make us human, what make us capable of genuine connection and compassion. You are perfectly imperfect. And this is not something to overcome. This is something to embrace, to honor, to work with skillfully. This is the ground of your practice, the source of your growth, and the foundation of your peace. As you drift towards sleep now, let go of any remaining demand that you be different than you are. Release the exhausting pursuit of perfection. Settle into the gentle acceptance of what is. Your imperfect body breathing imperfectly. Your imperfect mind producing imperfect thoughts. Your imperfect heart feeling whatever it feels. All of this is welcome. All of this is enough. All of this is the beautiful, authentic, precious reality of this moment. The Buddha taught that when we stop fighting reality and start accepting it, we discover the peace we have been seeking. That peace is available to you now, not after you fix yourself or achieve something or become someone different, but right now, exactly as you are, imperfections and all. Rest in this understanding. Let it hold you as you sleep. Let it whisper to you that you are enough. You have always been enough. You will always be enough, not because you are perfect, but because perfection was never what mattered. What matters is being real, being present, being willing to embrace the full reality of what you are. Sleep well, dear friend. You are perfect in your imperfection. You are complete in your incompleteness. You are whole exactly as you are. Thank you for joining us here at Calm Buddha Path.